When I was young, the house we lived in wasn't remarkable to anyone else. To me, though, it was the entire universe. It stood at the far end of a quiet street, its bricks weathered and pale, its windows tall and narrow, as though always peering down at us like watchful eyes. The floorboards sighed whenever you stepped too hard, and in winter, the walls carried the chills straight into your bones. But it was home, and I loved it the way a child always loves the place where her world begins. Yet in that house there was one thing that never fit. At the very end of the upstairs hallway, past my mother's sewing room, past the little table where we stacked newspapers, there was a door. It wasn't larger than the others, nor painted differently, but something about it felt heavier. Even before I was old enough to understand fear, I felt its weight. That door was always locked. No one ever spoke of it much. If we children wandered too close, my mother's voice would come sharp and quick. Not there. Go outside and play. And if we asked questions, her eyes hardened in a way that left no space for curiosity. My father, well, he never said a word. He'd pass the door as though it wasn't there at all. His steps measured, his gaze set firmly forward. But silence is never empty to children. Silence is loud. And in that silence, the locked door grew in our minds into something alive. My brother Daniel, I wasn't brave enough to dwell on it, not for long. I was the kind of girl who hid in books and dolls, who preferred the soft safety of imagination over the raw edge of the unknown. But my brother Daniel was different. 2 years older, wild as the wind that howled through the eaves in January. His eyes had that mischievous spark, the kind that made you want to follow him even when you knew trouble lay ahead. He used to nudge me whenever we passed the door. "One day, I'll open it," he'd whisper, "and you'll thank me for being the brave one." I'd tug his sleeve and hiss, "Don't. What if it's something bad?" He'd grin, wide and reckless. "Then it'll be our secret, just you and me." That was Daniel, always daring, always pulling me into his orbit. And I, timid, cautious, always let myself be pulled. The room in our dreams. At night, when the house had settled into its creaks and sighs, I sometimes thought I heard something from behind that door. Not loud, just the faintest creak, as though someone had shifted their weight inside, or a whisper that brushed against the edge of hearing, vanishing when I strained to listen. Once, I woke to find Daniel standing barefoot in the hallway, staring at the door. His face was pale in the moonlight. "Did you hear that?" he whispered. I hadn't. Not that time. But the way he looked at me made the hairs on my arms prickle. After that, the door crept into our dreams. Daniel confessed one morning that he dreamed of standing inside a room with no windows, only shelves upon shelves of boxes. He could never open the boxes, but he woke with the feeling that something inside was calling him. I told him I dreamed of the door itself of my hand, reaching for the knob, twisting it, and finding it open. Yet I always woke before stepping inside. Dreams, whispers, warnings, all wrapped themselves around that single locked door, until it was no longer wood and paint, but a living mystery beating quietly inside our home. Mother's warnings. Our mother was not unkind, but she was strict in her way and quick to anger when rules were bent. She ruled the house with a firmness born of necessity. When she caught us lingering too long near the door, her voice would lash out like a whip. "Didn't I tell you? That place is not for you. Do you want trouble?" Her eyes, usually soft brown, would flash darker then, almost fearful. It was rare to see fear in our mother. I remember once Daniel, bold as always, asked, "But why? What's in there?" Her hand froze over her sewing, her lips pressed thin. Then, after a long silence, she said only, "Some rooms are meant to stay closed. Don't make me say it again." I never forgot the way her hands trembled slightly as she threaded the needle afterward. Father's silence. If mother's warnings were like fences, father's silence was a wall. He never acknowledged the door, not once. He could walk past it 100 times and his eyes would never flicker toward it. Daniel tested him once. As father carried a stack of firewood past us in the hallway, Daniel said, "What's behind this door, father?" No response. Not even a blink, Daniel repeated louder. "Father, the door!" Father kept walking, the wood balanced on his shoulder, his boots thudding heavy against the floorboards. Daniel scowled. He heard me. I wasn't so sure. Sometimes I wondered if father's silence was its own kind of answer. Strange incidents. Children notice things adults dismiss. Or perhaps we invent them. But the things we noticed in that house felt real enough. One evening, while mother and father were downstairs with guests, Daniel and I crept into the hallway with a candle stub we'd stolen. The door loomed at the end, as always. But this time, we saw something different, a faint line of light leaking from underneath. We froze. "See that?" Daniel whispered. The light flickered once, then vanished. We scrambled back to our room, hearts pounding, and swore we'd seen it. But when we returned the next morning, the gap was dark, the door cold. Another time, we found a photograph slipped halfway out from beneath the rug just in front of the door. A woman's face stared up at us, beautiful, unfamiliar, her eyes full of a sadness I couldn't name. Daniel picked it up, studied it, then tucked it quickly back under the rug when we heard footsteps. That night, he whispered to me, "She looked a little like mother, didn't she? Only not." I tried not to think about it. Our childhood pact. By the time I was 12 and Daniel 14, the locked room was no longer just a curiosity. It had become a challenge. Daniel declared one evening as we lay awake in our shared room, the ceiling beams faint against the moonlight, "I'm going to open it." I sat up, alarmed. "You can't." What if father finds out?" He smirked. "Then I'll take the blame, but I have to know. Don't you want to know?" Of course I did. The not knowing had gnawed at us for years, but fear pressed heavier on me than curiosity ever could. Still, when he reached across the narrow space between our beds and held out his hand, I took it. "If we do this," he said, "we do it together, always together." And I whispered back, "Always." The night of resolve. The days stretched long after that, filled with stolen glances and hushed planning. We tested the knob each morning, rattling it gently when no one was near. We searched for keys in father's drawers, in mother's sewing box. Nothing. But Daniel was resourceful. He whispered of ways to pick locks, of tools we could fashion from hairpins and wire. I listened, equal parts horrified and fascinated, as his imagination spun. Then, one night, rain tapping against the window, the house sunk into deep silence. Daniel turned to me and said, "Tonight." I felt the blood rush in my ears. "Tonight?" He nodded, eyes burning. "I'm ready. We've waited long enough." I wanted to protest, to beg him to wait just one more day, one more week, but something in his face told me he wouldn't, and if I let him go alone, I'd never forgive myself. So I nodded, and that was how it began the night we decided to open the locked room. Cliffhanger of Part 1. We crept from our beds, candle flickering in Daniel's hand. The hallway stretched long and shadowed before us, each step groaning beneath our bare feet. At the far end, the door waited. Daniel knelt, pulling a bent wire from his pocket. His grin was fierce, triumphant. I clutched his shoulder, heart hammering. "Daniel, what if?" He looked back at me, eyes gleaming. "Then it'll be our secret, just you and me." The wire slid into the lock. The candle flame quivered. The silence grew thick as the ocean. And then Daniel had stolen the key. I don't know how or when. I only know that one evening, while the rain lashed hard against the windows and the wind pressed like fists at the shutters, he pulled me into the upstairs hallway. His eyes glittered with triumph, and in his palm gleamed something small and metallic. "The key," he whispered. "Tonight, we find out." My stomach dropped. I glanced toward the door as if it might hear us, as if it might already know. "Daniel," I hissed, "put it back. If Mother finds out," he shook his head, fierce and stubborn. "Aren't you tired of not knowing? Don't you want to see what's in there?" Did I? Every part of me screamed no. But curiosity is a cruel master. It digs at you, whispers in your ear, until silence becomes unbearable. And so, though my hands trembled, I nodded. We crept down the hallway, the boards groaning under our weight. Daniel slid the key into the lock. For a moment, nothing happened. Then click. The sound was sharper than thunder. We froze, listening, certain our parents would come storming up the stairs. But the house stayed quiet, except for the storm outside. Daniel turned the knob. Slowly the door opened. The room. It smelled of dust and something else, something faint, metallic, almost like rust. The air was colder than the rest of the house, and it carried the stillness of a place sealed away too long. Moonlight spilled through a narrow window, painting silver across the shapes inside. At first, I thought the room was empty. Then my eyes adjusted. There was a rocking chair in the corner, its cushion sagging with age. Beside it, a small wooden crib. My breath caught. A crib. I stepped closer, my heart hammering. Inside the crib lay a folded blanket, yellowed with time. A small toy rabbit, one ear missing, sat again,